Nestled in the heart of this idyllic community stood the home of Andrew and Jessica Howard. To their neighbors, the Howards appeared to be the perfect couple. Successful, attractive, and deeply in love. Andrew, a financial analyst with a prestigious firm, was known for his sharp mind and quiet demeanor. This gave him an air of authority that commanded respect from colleagues and neighbors alike. Jessica, a rising star in the local art scene, was the very picture of grace and creativity. Her vibrant paintings adorned the walls of galleries throughout the city, drawing admirers from far and wide. For years, the Howards' life seemed like a fairy tale. They hosted elegant dinner parties, attended community events, and were often seen strolling hand in hand through the neighborhood park. Their home, a stately Victorian with a wraparound porch, was the envy of the community. Its perfectly tended rose garden, a testament to their seemingly perfect union. As summer faded into autumn, the idyllic facade began to crack. The truth that lay behind the Howards' picture-perfect life would soon shock the quiet community to its very core. Andrew and Jessica Howard's story began long before they met, shaped by experiences that would ultimately set the stage for the horror to come. Andrew Howard's childhood was far from the suburban dream he later cultivated. Born to a single mother in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city, young Andrew learned early on that love was a commodity easily lost. His mother, struggling with addiction, cycled through a series of abusive relationships, leaving Andrew to fend for himself more often than not. From an early age, Andrew exhibited signs of obsessive behavior. He would fixate on objects or ideas, unable to let go until he had examined them from every angle. This trait served him well academically, propelling him to the top of his class despite his challenging home life. However, it also manifested in more troubling ways. Andrew became possessive of the few friends he made, reacting with intense jealousy when they spent time with others. As he grew older, Andrew channeled his obsessive nature into his studies, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university. There, he reinvented himself, shedding the trappings of his impoverished past and embracing the persona of a sophisticated, ambitious young man. Yet beneath the polished exterior, the scars of his childhood lingered. Jessica Hartley's upbringing stood in stark contrast to Andrew's. Raised in a loving, artistic family, she was encouraged from a young age to explore her creativity. Her parents, both educators, nurtured her talent and supported her dreams. Jessica's childhood home was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of oil paints. As a teenager, Jessica's artistic abilities blossomed. Her unique style, blending vibrant colors with surrealist elements, caught the attention of local gallery owners. By the time she entered college to study fine arts, Jessica was already making a name for herself in the art world. It was at a charity auction that Andrew and Jessica's paths first crossed. Andrew, now a rising star at his financial firm, was immediately captivated by the vivacious artist. Jessica, in turn, was drawn to Andrew's intensity and charm. Their courtship was a whirlwind of passion and romance, with Andrew showering Jessica with lavish gifts and unwavering attention. Within 6 months, Andrew proposed, presenting Jessica with a stunning diamond ring. Swept up in the fairy tale romance, she said yes. Their wedding, held in a picturesque vineyard, was the social event of the season. As they exchanged vows, neither could have imagined the dark turn their love story would take. To the outside world, Andrew and Jessica Howard were a match made in heaven. But as they settled into married life, the cracks in their foundation began to show, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to unimaginable horror. The early years of the Howards' marriage were marked by genuine happiness and mutual adoration. Andrew reveled in his role as Jessica's husband, proudly accompanying her to gallery openings and basking in the reflected glow of her success. Jessica, for her part, found Andrew's devotion intoxicating, feeling truly seen and appreciated for the first time in her life. Their home on Sycamore Lane became a hub of social activity, with the couple hosting lavish dinner parties for their growing circle of friends. Andrew would regale guests with tales of his financial conquests, while Jessica's warmth and charm kept conversation flowing. To all who knew them, the Howards seemed to have it all: success, love, and a bright future ahead. But as months turned into years, Subtle shifts began to occur in the dynamics of their relationship. Andrew's natural tendency toward obsession, once focused on his career, now centered entirely on Jessica. He began to monitor her movements, questioning her about her daily activities and growing increasingly agitated when she spent time away from him. At first, Jessica found Andrew's possessiveness flattering, interpreting it as a sign of his deep love for her. She would laugh off his probing questions, assuring him that he had nothing to worry about. But as his behavior intensified, she started to feel suffocated by his constant need for her attention and presence. Andrew's obsession manifested in increasingly controlling ways. He insisted on driving Jessica to and from her studio, claiming concern for her safety. He began to criticize her choice of clothing, suggesting more modest options that wouldn't attract attention from other men. When Jessica spoke of expanding her artistic reach to galleries in other cities, Andrew reacted with thinly veiled disapproval, citing the importance of focusing on their life together. As Jessica's career continued to flourish, Andrew's insecurity grew. He attended her gallery openings not as a supportive husband, but as a watchful guardian, his eyes constantly scanning the room for potential threats to their relationship. When admirers approached Jessica to discuss her work, Andrew would insert himself into the conversation, his arm wrapped possessively around his wife's waist. At home, Andrew began to subtly undermine Jessica's confidence. He would make offhand comments about the subjective nature of art, questioning whether her success was truly based on talent or merely on fleeting trends. These remarks, delivered with a smile and a kiss, slowly chipped away at Jessica's self-assurance. Jessica, caught up in the whirlwind of her rising fame, initially failed to recognize the full extent of Andrew's changing behavior. She attributed his mood swings and increased clinginess to stress from his job, convincing herself that it was just a phase they would work through together. But as Andrew's obsession deepened, so did the chasm between them. Jessica found herself censoring her conversations, carefully considering her words to avoid triggering Andrew's jealousy or disapproval. She began to withdraw from friends, canceling plans at the last minute to appease her husband's desire for her constant presence. In quiet moments, when Andrew was at work and she was alone in her studio, Jessica would stare at her half-finished canvases, feeling the spark of creativity that had once burned so brightly beginning to flicker. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in her life, marriage. But the thought of confronting Andrew filled her with a nameless dread. Little did Jessica know that behind Andrew's increasingly erratic behavior lurked a darkness far more sinister than she could have imagined. As his obsession grew, so too did the twisted fantasies that would ultimately lead their love story to its horrifying conclusion. As Andrew's obsession with Jessica intensified, a disturbing new element began to creep into his psyche. Late at night, while Jessica slept peacefully beside him, Andrew would sit bathed in the blue glow of his computer screen, delving into the darkest corners of the internet. What began as idle curiosity soon morphed into a full-blown fixation on the macabre and taboo. Andrew found himself drawn to historical accounts of cannibalism, poring over tales of the Donner Party and the ritualistic practices of ancient cultures. He devoured true crime stories about killers who had consumed their victims, his mind racing with a mixture of revulsion and fascination. As the weeks passed, his online searches became more specific, more disturbing. How to prepare human flesh, effects of consuming human meat, legal consequences of cannibalism. In the recesses of his troubled mind, a horrifying fantasy began to take shape. Andrew imagined consuming Jessica, not just metaphorically, as he had with his possessive behavior, but literally. The idea of making her a permanent part of himself, of truly possessing her in every way possible, became an all-consuming obsession. During the day, Andrew struggled to maintain his facade of normalcy. He went through the motions at work, his mind constantly drifting to his dark desires. In meetings, he would find himself staring at his colleagues' throats, wondering about the taste and texture of human flesh. These thoughts both thrilled and disgusted him, adding to the turmoil in his fractured psyche. At home, Andrew's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would watch Jessica intently as she moved about the house, his gaze lingering on the curve of her neck, the softness of her skin. During dinner, he would ask strange questions about her diet and exercise routine, framing them as concern for her health while secretly assessing her quality as potential sustenance. Jessica, unaware of the true nature of Andrew's thoughts, attributed his odd behavior to stress and tried her best to soothe him. She suggested they take a vacation, hoping that time away from work might help Andrew relax. But the idea of being alone with Jessica, away from prying eyes, only fueled Andrew's dark fantasies. As his obsession grew, Andrew began to see signs and omens everywhere, convincing himself that fate was pushing him toward his gruesome goal. A rare steak served at a restaurant became a divine message. A paper cut on Jessica's finger, leaving a drop of blood on her painting, seemed like an invitation. Andrew knew his thoughts were wrong, that they crossed a line no sane person would contemplate. In moments of clarity, he would be overwhelmed with shame and self-loathing. He considered seeking help, even going so far as to research therapists in the area. But the fear of exposure, of losing Jessica and the life he had built, always held him back. Instead, Andrew retreated further into his private world of twisted desires. He began keeping a journal, hidden in a locked drawer in his home office, where he detailed his fantasies in graphic, disturbing prose. As the pages filled, Andrew felt himself slipping further from reality, edging closer to a point of no return. As summer gave way to autumn, the facade of normalcy began to crumble. Jessica, no longer able to ignore the changes in her husband, found herself walking on eggshells in her own home. Andrew's mood swings had become more pronounced, his behavior increasingly unpredictable. One crisp Saturday morning, Jessica was preparing for an important meeting with a prestigious gallery owner from New York. As she applied her makeup, Andrew appeared in the bathroom doorway, his eyes dark with barely contained anger. He demanded to know why she was getting so dressed up, accusing her of trying to attract attention from other men. When Jessica tried to explain the importance of the meeting, Andrew flew into a rage, knocking her carefully arranged portfolio to the floor and scattering sketches across the tile. Shocked and frightened by this outburst, Jessica seriously considered canceling the meeting. But a small voice inside her, one that had been growing louder in recent months, urged her not to give in to Andrew's controlling behavior. With trembling hands, she gathered her sketches and left for the meeting, ignoring Andrew's alternating pleas for forgiveness and muttered threats. The incident marked a turning point in their relationship. Jessica began to notice things she had previously overlooked or dismissed. The way Andrew's gaze would linger on her throat during conversations, a strange glint in his eye that sent shivers down her spine, his insistence on preparing all their meals himself, claiming it was an expression of his love, while questioning every morsel she put in her mouth. Jessica confided in her closest friend, Beatrice, sharing her growing fears about Andrew's behavior. Beatrice urged her to leave, offering her spare room as a safe haven. But Jessica, still clinging to the memory of the man she had fallen in love with, hesitated. She convinced herself that if she could just understand what was troubling Andrew, she could help him return to his old self. Meanwhile, Andrew's professional life was unraveling as rapidly as his personal one. His obsession with Jessica and his dark fantasies left little room for focus on his work. He began making careless errors, missing important deadlines, and snapping at colleagues. His once promising career was now hanging by a thread, with whispered conversations and concerned looks following him through the office. During a crucial presentation to the company's biggest client, Andrew's mind wandered to thoughts of Jessica. He found himself describing market trends in terms of consumption and digestion, his words becoming increasingly bizarre and inappropriate. The clients shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging worried glances, as Andrew's supervisor attempted to salvage the meeting. The following day, Andrew was called into his supervisor's office. He was presented with a choice: take a leave of absence to address his obvious personal issues or face termination. In a moment of clarity, Andrew agreed to the leave, recognizing it as an opportunity to spend more time with Jessica and to finally act on his deepening obsession. As news of Andrew's professional troubles spread through their social circle, the invitations to dinner parties and community events began to dry up. The Howards, once the golden couple, now found themselves increasingly isolated. Jessica, torn between her love for Andrew and her growing fear of him, threw herself into her art. Her paintings, once celebrated for their vibrant colors and joyful themes, took on a darker tone. Critics praised her new work for its raw emotion and haunting imagery, unaware of the turmoil that inspired it. In the quiet of their home, as autumn leaves fell outside their windows, Andrew and Jessica orbited each other like binary stars, locked in a decaying dance. The tension between them was palpable, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Neither could have predicted the horrifying form that explosion would take, nor how close they were to the point of no return, was unknown. With his leave of absence from work, Andrew found himself with an abundance of free time, a time he dedicated to nurturing his darkest fantasies. The idea of consuming Jessica, once a fleeting thought, had now become an all-encompassing obsession. In the recesses of his troubled mind, a plan began to take shape. Andrew's first step was to gather the necessary tools. He made a series of purchases, each seemingly innocent on its own but chilling when viewed as part of a larger scheme. A new set of sharp kitchen knives was ordered online to avoid suspicion. Heavy-duty plastic sheeting was ostensibly for a home improvement project. A large freezer was delivered under the guise of stocking up on food for the winter. As he accumulated his grim collection, Andrew immersed himself in research. He spent hours poring over anatomy textbooks, studying the human body with a detached clinical interest that belied his true intentions. He researched methods of sedation, weighing the pros and cons of various drugs and techniques. In a notebook hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his study, Andrew meticulously recorded his findings, sketching out plans and contingencies. The technical aspects of his plan occupied much of Andrew's thoughts, but he also grappled with the psychological implications of what he was considering. He tried to rationalize his desires, convincing himself that his act would be one of ultimate love and devotion. In his warped mind, consuming Jessica would ensure they would be together forever, her essence becoming a permanent part of him. As his plan solidified, Andrew found himself caught in a constant internal struggle. Moments of clarity would break through the fog of his obsession, leaving him horrified at what he was contemplating. In these moments, he would consider confessing everything to Jessica, begging for her help and forgiveness. But the pull of his dark desires was always stronger, dragging him back into the abyss of his twisted fantasy. Andrew began to test the waters, pushing the boundaries of his relationship with Jessica to see how far he could go. He tried new exotic foods, watching her reaction closely as he described dishes that skirted the edge of taboo. He initiated conversations about mortality and the nature of existence, probing Jessica's beliefs about the afterlife and the connection between body and soul. Jessica, already on edge from Andrew's erratic behavior, found these conversations deeply unsettling. She noticed a new intensity in his gaze when he looked at her, a hunger that seemed to go beyond mere desire. Though she couldn't put her finger on what exactly was wrong, her instincts screamed that she was in danger. As his plan neared completion, Andrew felt a mix of anticipation and dread. He knew that once he took action, there would be no going back. The life he had built, the facade of normalcy he had maintained for so long, would be shattered forever. But the compulsion to follow through with his dark fantasy had become too strong to resist. In the final days leading up to his planned act, Andrew's behavior became increasingly erratic. He alternated between periods of manic energy, during which he would lavish attention on Jessica, and dark moods, where he would retreat into himself, barely acknowledging her presence. The tension in their home reached a fever pitch, with both Andrew and Jessica aware that something monumental was about to occur, though only one of them knew the true nature of what was to come. The morning dawned gray and overcast, matching the somber mood that had settled over the community. Jessica awoke to find Andrew's side of the bed empty. The sheets were cold. She found him in the kitchen, meticulously sharpening a set of knives. The sight sent a chill down her spine, though she couldn't articulate why. "Andrew, you startled me," Jessica said, her voice trembling slightly. Andrew looked up, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "Everything's perfect," "My love," he replied, his voice unnaturally calm. "I'm just preparing for a special dinner tonight. I want everything to be just right." Jessica forced a smile, trying to ignore the knot of fear tightening in her stomach. "That sounds lovely," she said. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Andrew shook his head, returning his attention to the knife in his hand. "No need," he murmured. "I want this to be a surprise. You just relax and enjoy your day." Unable to shake her sense of unease, Jessica retreated to her studio. She tried to lose herself in her painting but found her hand shaking too much to hold a brush steady. Instead, she sat at her desk, penning a letter to her parents that she had no intention of sending. In it, she poured out her fears about Andrew's behavior and her growing sense that something was terribly wrong in their marriage. Writing the words felt cathartic, even if she knew they would never be read. Meanwhile, Andrew went about his preparations with a methodical precision that belied the madness of his intentions. He lined the basement with plastic sheeting, arranged his tools with care, and prepared the sedatives he planned to use. Each action was accompanied by a running commentary in his head, a twisted logic that justified his plans as acts of love and devotion. As the day wore on, neighbors noticed unusual activity at the Howard house. Beatrice, Jessica's friend who lived across the street, observed Andrew making multiple trips to his car, loading and unloading various items. She considered calling Jessica to check in but hesitated, not wanting to seem nosy. Another neighbor, elderly Mr. Grayson, was out walking his dog when he heard raised voices coming from inside the Howard home. He paused, straining to make out the words, but could only discern the tone. Jessica's voice, high and frightened, followed by Andrew's lower, more menacing rumble. Inside, the confrontation that Mr. Grayson had overheard was reaching a boiling point. Jessica, unable to bear the tension any longer, confronted Andrew about his behavior. Her face streaked with tears, she expressed her confusion and fear over the changes in his behavior and their relationship. She pleaded with him to open up and explain what was happening. Andrew, feeling his carefully laid plan slipping away, struggled to maintain his composure. He responded cryptically, claiming she wouldn't understand and insisting that his actions were for the sake of their love. Sensing the dangerous undercurrent in Andrew's words, Jessica began to retreat. She suggested taking some time apart, proposing to stay with her parents until they could work through their issues. As Jessica turned to leave, Andrew's demeanor suddenly changed. He grabbed her arm forcefully, preventing her departure. His voice took on a menacing tone as he declared that he wouldn't allow her to leave, insisting that they were destined to be together forever. In that moment, looking into her husband's eyes, Jessica saw the full extent of his madness. She realized with a clarity that cut through her fear that she was in mortal danger. As Andrew's grip tightened, Jessica knew that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of her marriage, but her very survival. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Howard's living room, the situation had reached a critical point. Jessica, her arm bruised from Andrew's grip, stood frozen in place, her mind racing to find a way out. "This nightmare, Andrew, please," she pleaded, struggling to keep her voice calm. "Let's talk about this. Whatever's going on, we can get through it together. We can get help." Andrew's eyes, once filled with love and warmth, now burned with a manic intensity that chilled Jessica to her core. "Don't you see?" he said, his voice eerily calm. "This is the only way we can truly be together forever." As he spoke, Andrew began to guide Jessica towards the basement door, his grip on her arm never loosening. Jessica's heart raced, knowing instinctively that if she allowed herself to be taken down those stairs, she might never come back up. In a desperate bid for freedom, Jessica stomped hard on Andrew's foot and twisted out of his grasp. She ran for the front door, her fingers fumbling with the lock as Andrew recovered and lunged toward her. Just as she managed to wrench the door open, Andrew slammed it shut, the bang echoing through the quiet suburban street outside. Mr. Grayson, who was returning from his evening walk, heard the commotion and paused. He could hear muffled shouting coming from inside the Howard home, the voices rising in intensity. Concerned, he approached the house, his hand hovering over his phone, ready to call for help. Inside, Jessica found herself cornered in the kitchen. She grabbed a knife from the counter, holding it out in front of her with shaking hands. "Stay back, Andrew," she warned, her voice quavering. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." Andrew paused, his eyes fixed on the knife in Jessica's hand. "My love," he said, his tone sickeningly sweet, "you don't understand. This is for us. I'm gonna make us one. You'll be a part of me forever." As he spoke, Andrew inched closer, his hand reaching for something in his pocket. Jessica, realizing with horror what he intended, knew she had to act. With a cry of fear and desperation, she lunged forward, the knife slashing across Andrew's outstretched arm. Andrew reeled back, more surprised than hurt, staring at the thin line of blood welling up on his skin. For a moment, the shock seemed to clear his mind. "Jessica," he said, his voice suddenly small and confused. "What's happening?" Jessica, seeing a glimmer of her husband in those confused eyes, felt a surge of hope. "Andrew," she said gently, lowering the knife slightly, "it's okay. We can get through this. Let me help you." But the moment of clarity was fleeting. Andrew's eyes hardened once more, the madness returning in full force. "No," he growled. "It's too late. We've come too far." With surprising speed, Andrew lunged forward, knocking the knife from Jessica's hand. She cried out in pain and fear as he grabbed her, his strength overwhelming her attempts to break free. Andrew began to drag her towards the basement door, Jessica's heels leaving scuff marks on the polished hardwood floor as she fought against him. Outside, Mr. Grayson had heard enough. The sounds of struggle and Jessica's cries for help spurred him into action. He dialed 911, his voice urgent as he reported a domestic disturbance to the dispatcher. Inside the house, Jessica managed to break free once more, running for the stairs in a desperate bid to reach a phone. Andrew pursued her, his face contorted with rage and frustration. As they struggled on the landing, a vase was knocked over, shattering on the floor below. The noise caught the attention of Beatrice, who had been watching the Howard house with growing concern all evening. She saw shadows moving frantically behind the curtains and heard what sounded like a scream. Without hesitation, she too called 911, her voice joining Mr. Grayson's in urging the police to hurry. As sirens began to wail in the distance, Andrew realized his carefully laid plans were crumbling around him. In a last desperate attempt to fulfill his twisted fantasy, he redoubled his efforts to subdue Jessica. The two grappled at the top of the stairs, teetering dangerously close to the edge. Just as Andrew seemed to gain the upper hand, the sound of screeching tires and car doors slamming echoed from outside. The police had arrived, drawn by the frantic calls of concerned neighbors. As flashlight beams cut through the gathering darkness outside, Andrew and Jessica remained locked in their final, desperate struggle. The fate of their tragic love story hung in the balance. The quiet was shattered by the piercing wail of police sirens as squad cars converged. Officers leapt from their vehicles, hands on their holstered weapons, responding to the urgent calls of a domestic disturbance. Inside the house, Andrew and Jessica froze at the sound of car doors slamming and urgent voices outside. Jessica, seeing her chance for salvation, broke free from Andrew's grip and raced down the stairs, screaming for help. Andrew, his mind reeling from the sudden interruption of his plans, hesitated for a crucial moment before giving chase. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, the front door burst open, revealing two police officers with weapons drawn. "Drop to the ground now," one officer shouted, his voice authoritative and firm. Andrew, cornered and desperate, made a final lunge for Jessica. In that instant, several things happened at once. Jessica ducked out of the way, her momentum carrying her toward the safety of the officers. Andrew, overbalancing, stumbled and fell, and the officers, perceiving a threat, moved swiftly to subdue him. In a flurry of motion, Andrew was tackled to the ground, his arms wrenched behind his back as handcuffs were snapped into place. He thrashed and yelled incoherently, all pretense of sanity gone as he watched his twisted fantasy slip away. Jessica, shaking and sobbing, was gently led outside by a female officer. She collapsed into the arms of Beatrice, who had rushed over as soon as the police arrived. Neighbors gathered on the street, watching in shocked silence as the scene unfolded. Andrew, deemed mentally unfit to stand trial, was committed to a high-security psychiatric facility. Doctors struggled to understand the depths of his delusion, the way his love had twisted into something dark and monstrous. His case would become a cautionary tale of obsession taken to its extreme. The Howard house stood empty, a silent reminder of the tragedy that had almost occurred within its walls.